Welcome to a story that spans decades, a story of two nations and a terrifying choice. Imagine being on the brink of war, facing an existential threat. What would you do? This isn't a hypothetical question for Israel in 1967, and it's a very real one for Iran in 2025. Deep underground, hidden from prying eyes, a secret nuclear program slowly unravels the mysteries of the atom. It's creating the fuel for an atomic bomb. Enemies are getting closer, and the sounds of war are growing louder. Then, just before conflict erupts, a swift decision is made. Assemble at least one basic nuclear device. If the nation faces annihilation, could a nuclear explosion, its mushroom cloud seen by the world, be its salvation? This was Israel in 1967. Historians now believe the Jewish state came incredibly close to having a nuclear weapon. They didn't go through with the test of a crude bomb because their unexpected victory in the Six-Day War made it unnecessary. Now fast forward to Iran in the months leading up to what U.S. President Donald Trump dubbed the 12-Day War, a politically charged term not formally used in international contexts. Iran watched as Israel weakened its allies, from Hezbollah and Lebanon to devastating the Syrian military after Islamist rebels overthrew the Assad regime. With Israel threatening more violence if Iran rebuilds its enrichment capacity, Iran faces a similar question Israel faced in 1967. Though the historical parallels are striking, Iran's political context is far more adversarial today. Should it rush to create a nuclear weapon for ultimate deterrence, or step back from the edge? Vali Nasser, a former senior advisor to the U.S. State Department, says Iran is now in the midst of a long-running, serious internal debate. It's the do-or-die moment. He also finds it ironic that Israel is pushing Iran to make the same decision they once made. The Six-Day War changed the Middle East forever. Israel's surprise victory led to the capture and occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. It also transformed a young Israel into a unique, albeit completely secret, nuclear power. Its dozens of nuclear devices remain undeclared and undisputed. The West's acceptance of Israel's secret arsenal, estimated at nearly 100 sophisticated weapons, is seen in the Middle East as hypocrisy. They allow an ally to ignore non-proliferation rules while punishing Iran, which has largely followed its treaty obligations. But Israel's special status isn't just because of its alliance with the U.S. It came from a different historical period, when Israel was younger and weaker and its enemies were stronger and determined to wipe it off the map. A secret 1969 deal with the U.S., which allowed Israel to keep its nuclear weapons undeclared, showed how Israeli leaders used their precarious position after the Holocaust to get an extraordinary exemption that no other state received. If Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon now, it would create an impossible choice for world powers. Should they accept a new bold member into the nuclear club, tempting others to follow? Or should they punish Iran like North Korea? There's still a third option: to gain political benefits by stepping back from the nuclear threshold. Avner Cohen, a leading historian of Israel's nuclear secrets, believes the Middle East reached this point because Iran imitated a young Israel. They operated a nuclear program that was partly open and partly secret, getting closer and closer to the bomb, but delaying any final decision until absolutely necessary. He notes that Iran wanted, and in many ways were imitating, the opaque Israeli modus operandi, but their political circumstances were different and more adversarial. He's referring to Israel's 1969 deal with the U.S. to keep its arsenal secret. In the end, the world has been much more friendly to Israel and less forgiving of the Iranians. It took over 4 decades for the rivalry between Israel and Iran to erupt into direct conflict. During that time, Iran's leaders made the destruction of the Zionist entity a core part of their political discourse. For Israel, Iran's growing military power since the turn of the century, its nuclear program, and its well-funded proxy groups were increasingly seen as an existential threat. For Iran, Israel became an existential threat more suddenly. Israeli leaders openly talk about regime change in Tehran, and their military has shown it can cause widespread damage across Iran at will. Unlike Israel, which managed to hide its nuclear ambitions even from close allies, Iran has moved closer to the technical ability to build a bomb. This happened after they signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty and endured strict inspections while swearing off using nuclear weapons. Ayatollah Khamenei even declared their use haram in the early 2000s. Until Israel and the US attacked Iran's nuclear program, Western intelligence and the UN agreed that Iran had not formally decided to pursue a nuclear weapon. For Israel, the impending conflict in 1967 removed any doubts among policymakers. Historical records show Prime Minister Levi Eshkol discussing a certain weapon with colleagues. Military Chief Yitzhak Rabin worried about a surprise attack on Israel's only nuclear reactor, warning it lacked international legitimacy. In Iran last year, as conflict with Israel escalated, policymakers began issuing ambiguous warnings that Tehran might change its nuclear doctrine. Months after the initial exchange of strikes between Israel and Iran in April 2024, Kamal Karazi, an advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei, told the Financial Times that we are not for building nuclear weapons. But he added that if Iran faced an existential threat, naturally, we would have to change our doctrine. In February last year, Ali Akbar Salehi, the former head of Iran's nuclear energy organization, said that Iran's extensive nuclear research program had led to vast technical expertise. When asked if Iran could build a nuclear weapon, he used an analogy. What does a car need? It needs a chassis, an engine, a steering wheel, a gearbox. You're asking if we made the gearbox, I say yes. Have we made the engine? Yes, but each one serves its own purpose. In the lead-up to Israel's 1967 war, research by various government departments resulted in the knowledge and even the fuel needed for a nuclear device. However, there's no public evidence that its leaders explicitly ordered the construction of a bomb until just before the conflict. As conflict with Israel became more likely in recent months, Iran made one major change. It doubled its stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% purity, far beyond what's needed for nuclear energy, to about 400 kilograms. This stockpile could theoretically be quickly enriched to weapons grade. But any implosion device Iran could fit it into would be a crude, though effective prototype, far from a sophisticated weapon. In Israel, nuclear scientists quickly assembled such a prototype and handed it over to soldiers in 1967. This is according to research by Cohen, which includes an interview with the military official in charge of what became known as the Samson option. This weapon emerged from years of research and covert operations, including at the Negev Nuclear Research Center at Dimona in the late 1950s, where Israel built a secret underground facility for processing plutonium. Back then, Israel's security concerns didn't involve Iran. The Shah, an ally of Washington, received a nuclear reactor in 1967 as a gift from the U.S. under the Eisenhower-era Atoms for Peace program. A year later, he signed a non-proliferation treaty. By the time of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, when the Shah was overthrown, Iran's nuclear research was basic, and most nuclear physicists left the country after the revolution. Around the same time, the U.S. gathered scientists to study two flashes detected in 1979 by an old satellite. A few months later, President Jimmy Carter wrote in his diary that we have a growing belief among our scientists that the Israelis indeed conducted a nuclear test explosion in the ocean near the south end of Africa. Around then, Israel made a policy decision that remains unchanged, according to Uzi Arad, former research director at Israel's spy agency Mossad. This was the Begin Doctrine. If a neighbor's nuclear knowledge was deemed a threat, Israeli warplanes would attack. Arad states, the nucleus of Israel's approach to proliferation has always been this: First, if and when a nuclear program becomes a threat to Israel, it would exhaust all other means to stopping it. Then it would fall back on an airstrike. So in 1981, Israel attacked a nuclear reactor in Iraq. In 2007, it hit a secret North Korean-supplied reactor under construction in Syria. And now, in 2025, Israeli warplanes are flying over Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan in Iran. This partly shaped Iran's own nuclear stance, which has changed with geopolitics. In the 1980s, after its war with Iraq, Iran began exploring a nuclear program to prevent another conflict with its neighbor, but the first Gulf War made this threat irrelevant. In 2004, a Pakistani nuclear scientist confessed to selling older centrifuge technology to Iran in the 1990s, which many see as the start of Iran's enrichment experiments.
And in 2003, after seeing the U.S. invade Iraq in search of weapons of mass destruction, Iran declared and shelved a secret program called Ahmad. The UN watchdog said it had been researching, but not building, nuclear weapons. The focus remained on enrichment, says Nasser. The Iranians saw an interest in actually, for a very long period of time, in using their program as a way to bring the U.S. to the table and get the U.S. to agree to lift sanctions, he said. They understood there's no other issue that will bring the U.S. to negotiations. Iran's leaders have consistently maintained that they are exercising their legal right as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to have a peaceful nuclear energy program. They've allowed inspectors into declared facilities, even for surprise visits. But they also built new, secret enrichment facilities in Natanz, revealed by whistleblowers in 2002, and then at Fordo, a site discovered by Western intelligence agencies in 2008. Inspectors from the UN nuclear watchdog were later allowed to visit, even in the days just before Israel launched its surprise attack. Now those facilities have been damaged, along with much of Iran's conventional defenses. Proxy militias that surrounded Israel with a ring of fire have been significantly weakened. Many missile launchers and aerial defenses have been destroyed. This leaves Iran with a dilemma as it sits on the edge of becoming a nuclear-armed power. On building a weapon, Nasser says Iran is still doing the cost-benefit analysis, referring to negotiations with the Europeans and the US. And right now, perhaps the debate has swung much more in the direction of those who say just do the bomb. He concludes, but the door is not completely shut. The only way you're going to divert the trajectory that Iran is on is to put a deal on the table that is compelling enough and is resilient enough to influence this debate in Iran. The echoes of 1967 are loud in 2025, but the stakes are even higher. Will the world witness another secret sprint to the bomb, or is there still time to step back from the nuclear brink?